Are you looking to take your personal finances to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Monday Money Tip Podcast, presented by I Was Broke, Now I'm Not, with your host, Joseph Sangle.
Well, welcome to the Monday Money Tip Podcast, presented by Fully Funded Life. My name is Joe Sangle. I'm your fired up host to help you, yes, you, live a fully funded life. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see I'm pointing right at you. You might say, what is a fully funded life? Well, a fully funded life is being able to do exactly what you have been put on this earth to do, regardless of the cost or the income potential it might have for you. And today's episode is episode number
210.
Yes, and that is the voice of Whitney Purcell, my guest co-host, while Megan is out adapting to life, jumping from one child to three with her twin boys. And thank you so much for sitting in on another episode of the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here today.
Man, I'm so pumped about this topic. When I heard you sharing kind of this story, I was like, hey, that's something we need to talk about. So tell it's something very personal to you.
Yes.
Tell us what we're going to talk about today.
So today we're going to be talking about generational generosity. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my grandfather's story and what he practiced before he passed away in 2020.
Yeah, and I can't wait for that. That's going to be amazing. So before we jump into all of that story about your grandfather, we're going to talk about investing. And so we've explained this in a couple episodes. I just want to explain it again. Megan is normally my co-host. She has twin boys, as you might imagine. She is very busy. We pre-recorded some episodes with her, but by the time she went out, we still had a gap before she's coming back.
Yep.
And so as we're pre-recording these, the current money event section didn't seem to make sense because this is releasing in July, about 3 months from when we're actually recording this episode. Yeah. So we're actually talking about, topics that are more timeless. And today we're going to talk about investing. Mm-hmm. And so today I wanted to talk about, a lot of times when we think about an investing window, we think about investing for 40 years, a working lifetime. How long is a working lifetime for most people?
I don't know. I hope it's...
Most people kind of figure out a career, kind of.
Yeah,
25-ish.
42 years.
And then they work maybe 40, 42 years. Some people figured out they just know. They leave high school and go straight to a career, 18, and they work till they're 66, 70. They never stop. Others, it takes a while to figure it out. But I want to kind of think about, when we look at investing in time horizons of, it's usually 40 years, but, let's be honest, many of the people we meet with, they're in their 40s or 50s and they're just starting.
Yeah. So
they don't have 20, 30 years, except they may have 50 years. Mm-hmm. They may live to be 80 or 90. And also, what about our children? How old are your kiddos? You have two daughters.
Yes, I have two. They're 7 and 5.
So 7 and 5. So you think about it for them, if they got some money, Christmas, birthdays, special days, they do some chores, they earn money because these are extra chores. They could have a time horizon of 50, 60, 70 years. Mm-hmm. Isn't that amazing?
That is.
When you think about it. And so I wanted to just kind of think about, what could that look like? And I'm going to pull up my phone here, and there's a calculator. We'll share it in the show notes, but it's at I Was Broke, Now I'm Not. It's a wildly popular website. I don't know if you know about it, but I Was Broke, Now I'm Not says free tools. Like if you go to the website, it says tools, and you can select these tools. And I really love my investment calculator that I came up with. I still don't know how I came up with this. I came up with this over 15 years ago. But you're able to put percentage returns in here. So let's say 11% rate of return. That's what the S&P 500 has yielded since 1941. So that would be 81 years.
Yeah, dependable.
So and past performance, not indicative of future performance, may lose value. Invest wisely. All the Securities Exchange Commission statements that I'm not bound by because I'm not a registered investment advisor. But let's talk about, how many months is 50 years?
Let's see. That would be 60?
600.
Or 600. Yeah, sorry.
And so in 50 years, your daughters will be?
Months. They will be 57 or 55.
Yeah. Is that amazing to think of them as that?
Yeah. I'm still struggling with seeing the one as 5. She just turned 5 a couple weeks ago, or a week ago. So
let's say, what do you think would be reasonable for them to start contributing to a thing every month? If they chose to do that, could they do $10 a month?
I think my oldest
20?
could probably do $10 a month.
Okay. So I've mentioned this a couple times. Greenlight is a pretty neat program that I've adapted for my children. It's actually a systematization of what I did with my oldest daughter.
Okay.
And so we mentioned it in a previous episode. We'll link to it. But the Greenlight app, it has an app. Your kids can have it on their device, and they only access what you allow them to access. And you can transfer money to them from your account.
Yeah.
And so they can save for different things. And you can also put their chores in there, and they keep track of their chores. And based on accomplishment of chores, they get their allowance or don't get it. And then they get a MasterCard with it. And you can control where that MasterCard can be used or whether it can be used at all. And it teaches them the use of money and budgeting. And right now, my son is saving for a guitar.
I love that.
But let's say $10 a month. They recommend, as a starter, that they earn an allowance equal to their age.
Okay.
So $5, $7. That's not a bad recommendation.
No, that's not bad.
So let's say $10. In 15 years, that $10, if it grew at 11%, would be worth $4,547. That's not bad.
Yeah, not bad.
But let's go to 50 years.
Okay.
What do you think it'd be worth?
I don't know.
So they will have invested $10 a month for 50 years. They never got on it. They never changed. It's just $10 a month. That's $6,000 total.
$6,000 invested.
Okay. What do you think it'd be worth in 50 years if it grew 11% a year?
Well, with compound interest, is it going to be like close to like $400,000 or $500,000?
At 11%, it'd be $259,000.
Oh man, that's
At
awesome.
60 years, which is going to be about their retirement age, it'd be $777,000. That's $10.
Yeah.
And that's if they never increased it to 100 or 1,000 when they got a full-time job.
Yeah. So you're
Isn't that
thinking
amazing?
about $750,000 from $10 a month.
From $10 a month. So I want to just express a couple things with this. What would it look like? Hey, you're listening to this podcast. You may think, I don't have that long. I'm 35. I don't have that long, Joe. I don't have that long. Well, how old's your grandma? How old's your great-grandma? Are they 85? Because then you do have that long. And I will say right now, your ability and energy to produce income is going to be greatly reduced when you're 85 versus where you are now. True or false?
True.
So do you want to be investing now or later?
Yeah.
So think about the time horizon that you have and think in terms of bigger chunks, because we know with compound interest, if once you start the most important thing, which is consistent investing, not even really caring the amount does matter, but just consistently, at least monthly, putting something away. Mm-hmm. By the way, you can invest through the Greenlight app as well, which is pretty neat. Yeah. The kids can too.
That's awesome.
In real stocks or mutual funds. But you can, if you do that for long time horizons, wow. And think about the lessons you're teaching your kids.
Yeah.
Really awesome. That. So I just wanted to just share that as a practical, right now relevant tip. Check out Greenlight app. It's pretty neat. I'm not compensated to promote it. I'm just sharing my own journey of how I'm using it for my kids who are 8 and 12 right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love that, because I love that you're looking at ways that you can start teaching kids essential money skills now.
Yeah.
Like we've had conversations with my older daughter who's 7 about budgeting because of what we talk about at work. But I love then taking it to the next step of talking about investing.
Yes.
So
saving is different than investing.
Yes.
We want to make sure they learn that at a young age. Tell everybody about the success story, because this podcast is powered by our listeners and viewers, on those of you on YouTube, success.
Yes, we love to hear your success stories. Today's success story is from Sheri, who is participating in the 90-day generosity challenge at her church. She has started budgeting and is viewing generosity in a whole new light. Sheri said, "March is my first full month with the budget. To my astonishment, it is going better than I could have imagined. I can no longer refer to my tithe as a bill. No one enjoys a bill. My tithe is a gift to my Father. It is the most important investment in my life that I can make. I never really had a full understanding of all of this. Thank you for the challenge and your time with us."
Wow. That is awesome.
I know. I love that.
Thank you, Sheri. That is awesome. You know, what I did with this 90-day generosity challenge, and it's something I've been offering at a few churches I visited, is I sat down and I wrote down my 13 favorite passages of scripture related to this practicing of generosity. Not only tithing and honoring the Lord with the first fruits, but also giving to others and positioning yourself for blessing by living the life is more blessed to give than to receive, that giving cheerfully. And so I love it because this is the fruit of that labor, of that calling. And Sheri's experiencing it. I love that she doesn't call it a bill anymore.
Yes.
That's awesome.
I think that's such a great tip to think about. I heard a mentor one time told me, when we think of things as spiritual disciplines, when we hear that discipline term, it's like, oh, like kind of cringing. But when we think about it as a holy habit, it kind of refocuses that. So when you're thinking about tithing, maybe it's not a spiritual discipline. Maybe it's that holy habit that you have to lean into. And then you'll start seeing that effect in your heart and in your life, like Sheri's talking about.
That's awesome. And Sheri, thanks so much for taking time to email us, to contact us with your success story. We celebrate your journey and your next step that you've taken with you. And so today we're talking about generational generosity and how do we practice generational generosity? So when you hear those terms, podcast crew, those of you listening and watching, what do you think of when you think of generational generosity? Well, Whitney's grandfather practiced generosity in a way that really had a generational impact. And there's this passage of scripture that we're going to give as a verse at the end, but I just wanted to share it now. It's found in the book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 22. And it says that a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. So for all the way to the grandkids. And so let's start. Tell everyone about your grandfather.
Yeah. So my grandpa grew up on a little farm in Nebraska, and he actually was one of the first people in his family to go to college. And the way that his dad paid for him and his siblings to go to college was each year he would sell one cow from the herd, and that would get deposited into an account, the proceeds would, and that was what paid for him to go to, at the time, I believe, now it's called Southern Nazarene University. I believe it was like Bethany Bible College or Bethany Nazarene College at the time. So he went from this small farm in Nebraska and then moved down to Oklahoma and went to college there. He got a degree in seminary, actually, and met my grandmother there. And their first job out of school was he went and pastored for a couple of years. And then,
so like a 22, 23-year-old pastor.
Yeah. So pastored. And I didn't even know that until a couple of years ago, because I only knew what his next step was. He felt called to then be a teacher. So he went back to school, got a degree in education, was a teacher, and then later a vice principal for the Shawnee Mission School District there in the Kansas City Metro.
Wow.
So I just knew him as teacher principal, but found out a few years ago that he had actually been a pastor for a couple of years as well. So they had 5 children. My grandmother stayed home most of the time during that, and was able to kind of be a homemaker for most of that time. And he had, 5 kids that he was putting through.
What was the mix?
School.
How many boys, how many girls?
So there were 3 girls and 2 boys. And my mom is the oldest of the 5.
Okay, so your mom is the oldest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so where did they grow up? They grew up in the outskirts of...
They grew up in the Kansas City Metro. So if you're familiar with that area near the Kansas City Zoo, they lived in that area for a little bit and then moved out to the suburbs in Olathe when my mom was in like middle school or high school age, I believe. And that's where my grandpa lived the rest of his years.
Wow. So. Olathe. That's one of those, you got to be from the area to pronounce that correctly.
Exactly.
You can tell people aren't from there by that word.
They'll call it Olaf.
Yeah, that's right. Olathe. Yeah. But so did you grow up near him?
Yes, I did. So I grew up in Olathe, lived there for most of my childhood. We moved away to Texas for a few years and then came back. Actually, at one point, our house was in the same couple neighborhoods that were all mashed up together. We used to go through the creek that was behind our house and take that down and around to where it came out near my grandpa's house. So we could kind of go and wander through the creek and then come up to his house. He had a huge tree in his front yard that had a swing out front. So we'd go and swing on grandpa's tree out front. And then later on, when we moved to another part of town, when we'd come back, he had a tree zip line that he put in his backyard for a little bit, which was a huge hit for my younger brother and my cousin and stuff.
So when you were going through the creek, sneaking over, did that seem like a major like safari?
Oh, I loved it. And now it's so funny because I've talked to my family about it, and I'm like, now I have kids that are that age, and I can't imagine letting them like run around the neighborhood and in the creek. And I'm like, we were there all the time, barefoot, and crawling in and out of everything.
Finding salamanders and all that stuff.
Yes.
So when you would show up at his house, was he retired already? Would you?
Yeah, so he retired when I was, I think about 4 or 5, maybe-ish. I remember him stopping and slowing down with work and doing that. Later, he would actually substitute teach. So I got to have my grandpa as a sub one time.
Wow.
I will say my grandpa is like the sweetest, kindest person, but he also had towards later on in his life had a filter issue where the filter was starting to leave. So you can imagine that as a teenager and your grandpa is subbing in a math class in your school, you're like, no, what is he going to say? Oh man.
You know, they say, you know, as you get older, that's one of the great benefits is your give a care. Other people say it, a lot of other phrases. Your give a care goes away.
Yes.
And you don't even care if your socks match. And you are going to share your opinion because, you know, it's just something that is the freedom of being older. I remember my grandfather had problems listening. He couldn't hear. He had hearing aids. Yeah. And he was like, my beautiful thing is I hear everything they're saying. I can just be selective in what I respond to. He's like, I can just say, oh, I didn't hear you. Oh, it's awesome. So what is the fondest memory that you have of your grandpa? What was his name?
Jerry. Yes, Jerry Yazel. So he was I don't know. I think I have several, but one of my favorite things that he would do, my grandmother passed away when I was an infant, and then he remarried a few years later. So I always knew his second wife as Mim Mim. So Mim Mim and Papa every year at Christmas would make us these sweatshirts, like, I don't know, remember like the appliques like before where it was like some kind of critter or animal. So we had like sweatshirts that Mim Mim had made every year. And then Papa had a shop down in his basement and he would cut out like wood toys or little picture frames that you could put your school picture in. So each year there was a themed one where it was like an ornament that would hang on the tree, and he cut them out with all of his stuff down in his shop. And he had this whole area set up. So Mim Mim and Papa, we'd go over to their house and we would help him like make this ornament and paint it. And then each year they'd put our little school picture on and it would hang on the tree. And I just remembered that it's something small and tiny, but I just loved like getting to go down in his shop and be part of that.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Did he have a wood lathe? Like where it would turn wood and he could throw the chips everywhere?
I'm trying to think what he had. I don't think he had anything that complex, but he just had this like little shop there.
Cozy shop in the basement.
Cozy shop down there. And
I like it.
Yeah.
You know, as people get older, they got to have their space, their place.
Yes.
So I'm sure that was his spot.
And he was a tinkerer. Like he loved to be outdoors. I think growing up on a farm, you know, there's lots of outdoor activities. There's always chores and things. So he was always looking for a way to like do something. He was not a sit and rest person.
Yeah.
Idleness was not his friend. So he was constantly on the go.
So we're talking about generational generosity. And one of the things that we were talking about and why I said we had to have a conversation about this is when your grandfather, your Papa Jerry, passed away. Did he pass away before Mim Mim did?
Yes. No, he passed away after Mim Mim did. Okay. So Mim Mim passed away when I was in college or towards the end of college. And then he passed away in 2020, actually in the height of COVID.
And so he left an incredible legacy. He lived out this verse that we shared, Proverbs 13:22, that a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. Share with everyone about what that was. Yeah.
So part of what my grandpa did was he had acquired different rental properties. So you come from a family of 5 on a teacher's and then principal's salary. You had to be wise with your money. And so he started to invest and he bought rental properties and was able to make a good amount of money. And when he passed away, he not only left an inheritance to each of his 5 kids and some of his stepkids, but also to all of the grandkids and step grandkids as well. So each of us received an inheritance when he passed away.
A substantial inheritance,
Yes,
and you're not going to share this specific amount, but
yeah,
it was more than a Happy Meal.
Yes, it was something where like I can go in and start an investing account from just what he gifted us.
That's incredible.
So he wanted to be super intentional with that. And I was talking to my mom in preparation for this. And when he was getting older, she's the executor of his trust. And she started going with him to his Edward Jones meetings. And when he would go and meet there, his Edward Jones guy would say, you know, I ask Jerry every year, what is his goal? And we talk about this a lot. Like when one of the first things you have to do is set goals for yourself. And he said his number one goal was to pass down something to his kids and his grandkids.
Wow.
That was his goal. So
that's amazing. So, you know, I think all of us have this switch in our life where, and I think Bob Buford wrote a book called Halftime. And he says, many of us strive the first half of our life for success, and we work the back half and rest of our life for significance. And I think there's a moment where if you get there in your generosity journey, that you realize I have enough stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm living my life for beyond my life.
Yeah.
It's for those who are coming after me. So you were aware that he was going to leave an inheritance for you?
I think about 5 or 6 years before that, he had kind of told us that he had set aside an earmarked money for each of us grandkids. And that was part of what he wanted to do for us. So we knew that was coming.
How did he tell you? Did he tell you individually or together at a Christmas gathering?
He individually talked to us about it and just said, like, you know, I'm doing my estate planning. It was kind of part of his conversation there. We knew that he actually made the decision, I think about 6 or 7 years before he passed, to start gifting money to his kids individually as well. Like, because you can give a certain dollar amount of gifts that's not taxable. Yep. And so he decided, I have more than enough. I don't need this much to live off of. And so he started to gift it to them so they could start doing investing.
This has become a common trend where people are saying, I'm not going to wait till I die, because I know that my kids or my heirs could benefit from it now.
Yeah. So he was giving that and gifting that. There were certain ones where like some of my aunts and uncles had bought some of his investment properties, or it would offset some of their inheritance that they got later on. But what he wanted to do was for them to start seeing that come in and to be able to use it for what they needed to then. So he had started that, I want to say at least 7 years before he passed. And he kind of talked about that in his heart for it. But this was something he practiced across the board. Like, it wasn't just with our family. We knew that Papa had a big heart for giving to the church. Like, tithe was no questions asked. Like, tithe is going to be paid. It was going to be offerings and participating in that. He loved to give. He loved Rotary. And so he gifted things to Rotary all the time. And so it was financial gifts, and then it was also time gifts that we saw him acting out over and over and over again. So,
you know, one of the things that those of us who climb up the ladder to get to the fully funded life, and we want everybody's listening to get there, ultimately, this becomes part of the conversation that your Papa Jerry had, is you build wealth.
Yeah.
And you're blessed with wealth. And you want to make sure that if you're leaving wealth for someone, that they're able to handle it. So I'm pretty confident that, how many grandkids or step grandchildren did he have
altogether
total collectively?
14.
14. I'm pretty sure there's one in there who is a spender.
Yeah.
Right? So he doesn't have full confidence that they're all going to manage it well, you know, but you want them to manage it well. Because if they're not going to manage it well, I might as well spend it on me or give it to someone other organization or individual who would. Did he do any type of, hey, now I want to make sure that you use this in a wise manner? Did he give any type of that communication?
So for his kids, actually, almost every one of them has an Edward Jones account now. So basically, as he started gifting things, like, he was talking with them about that as well. Yeah. So they've set up their own Edward Jones account. So he's transferring knowledge and wisdom. Yes. And saying, like, okay, you may not have the skills to do your investing on your own, but here, this is a tool that I've used. And so they have the investors there. There's always going to be someone or seasons where you don't make wise investments or you spend things that you shouldn't. But I think too, seeing how he was very frugal with what he had, like, I remember he was very generous. Like we'd go out to dinner and he would take care of dinner for everyone and do that. But like he had friends who teased him about how frugal he was and how he was kind of a penny pincher in terms of his own things.
Yeah.
Like he just did not do extravagant things for himself.
Yeah.
But it was for that goal of doing that later on to where he could then give in abundance to his kids and grandkids.
And that's really an important point to make. You know, it becomes it's not about me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you live a life of generosity and it becomes it's not about me.
Yeah.
What Dr. John Maxwell said, if you help enough people get what they want, later they'll help you get what you want. Mm-hmm. I think Zig Ziglar also said that. I don't know who said it first. So your grandfather let you know this is coming.
Yeah.
Did he let you know approximate amount?
Yeah, he did.
So that allows you to be thinking.
Yes.
Right? So, and then it happened. Your grandfather passes on, and this through the estate, it gets distributed.
Yeah.
So you receive it. I know that when I've coached people who received inheritance, first let's just say this: only 1 in 4 Americans will ever receive an inheritance of $10,000 or more. Only 1 in 4. Mm-hmm. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It's because 3 out of 4 spend every dime they have, and their estate can't even cover their obligations when they pass on. In the wealthiest country ever, with all this knowledge available to them, just clicking on YouTube, listening to podcasts would help them. So your grandfather's done this amazing thing. But when I coach people who do receive an inheritance, it's not just money for them. There's emotion, there's memories, there's I want to honor this person attached to it. So did you just run out and spend it?
No.
Or tell me some of those feelings that you experience with these dollars.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was looking at like a legacy for him, because at the time, since it was in the middle of the height of COVID, I was here in South Carolina and they were back in the Midwest. So we didn't get to have like a full funeral. Like family was in cars over there. So it was kind of like phone calls talking about it. But a lot of what came up and just thinking about him was how he had this generous heart for people and how this was something that he sacrificed for to give like each of us individually. It was earmarked for us. Mm-hmm. So I wanted it to be something that honored him. And I kind of use your rule of if you're going to use it in the next 5 years, like leave it liquid, and was thinking about, okay, I think I want to purchase an investment property, like a rental, my first rental income. So it's earmarked and sitting there. And it's in an Ally bank account there. But actually, since I just shared on another episode, sold a house and made a lot more off of the house than expected because of the market, I'm going to go in and start an investment account for that. So that's kind of my next step, is I want to use that and kind of use it for what he did too, where I can invest now. And
to leave a legacy to your grandkids.
Exactly. To leave a legacy for my grandkids, for my girls, and be intentional about talking about generosity financially, and then also generosity just in time too. Because he covered that across the board. So a lot of it was getting to think about like I said, it wasn't just generosity with the family. Like my mom was sharing stories about how he had a tenant one time who was deaf, and she was a single woman. And there were months where she couldn't cover rent, and he would cover it for her, or he'd go over there and fix things that were out of obligation, like that he would not have been obligated to do. Yeah. But he'd do that to help her. So he just had this heart.
It's just his way of living.
Yes. It was just this way of living, helping the single woman on his street.
And I think a lot of people who have not discovered the joy of generosity, they view it as an expense or an obligation. But when you view it as it truly is, it's an investment and an opportunity. Mm-hmm. It really is amazing. Do you think we could get a picture of your Papa Jerry?
Yes.
So let's say that we got this picture. We're gonna put it up on YouTube, and I hope people go look at it and see Papa Jerry. What I would like you to do is kind of speak to your Papa Jerry about what it meant to you as a granddaughter to see this model for you, and how you're going to try to live this on in your life.
Yeah, you're going to make me cry now, because he said, I think if I could tell my grandpa one thing now, I would just say that I'm thankful that he lived out a life obedient to Jesus, that he gave in a way that he had a heart for others. It was to his family, to the generations. It was his time, his talents, and his abilities. It was to people in his community. He took the time to look for people that were in need and give back to them. And that's something that I want to have a heart for as well, to carry on that legacy, is being generous with my financial resources, but also my time and talents. So I just want to tell him thank you for that, because I look at how it's impacted our family as individuals, and seeing how it's helped different individuals within our family who needed that. Yeah. But then also how it's inspired that heart to just to be thankful for what he did, because it would have been really easy for the story to be, he was just a teacher and he had 5 kids and they barely scraped by all those years and, you know, made ends meet and all of those things. But he was intentional and took the little that he had and made it into so much more.
He followed the biblical principles.
Yes. Yeah.
And so have you told your daughters about it?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this and kind of talking about giving and doing that. We haven't talked fully about his story, but
there will be a day.
Yes, there will be a day. But Ava already kind of has that heart where she has a heart for the homeless and wants to give and take care of them. So I can already see it passing down.
So it becomes a generational thing.
Yeah.
And so I would ask everybody who's listening to this podcast, sorry, I'm coughing here, but I would just ask you this question. Are you living in a way intentionally generous such that your granddaughter, like Whitney, would be sitting here on a podcast or whatever they're doing in the future, sharing the joy of knowing the giving nature and spirit of you? And if the answer is yes, awesome. If not, what changes could you make today? Like literally. And it can start with simple as preparing a budget and putting the tithe in there and putting an intentional investment in there. But Randy Alcorn said this: giving through your estate is your last act of stewardship. It really is your last act. It's your last acts of your life. And so I encourage you, have a will. And in your will, make sure that you clearly include words that you want those that you love the most to hear from you after you're gone. Because I want all of us to have that moment where our grandchildren are living out what Proverbs 13:22 says, which is a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. And so I thank you, Whitney, for sharing your Pawpaw Jerry's story. That's awesome.
Thank you for having me to share a little bit about him.
And you know, your grandma had a big part in this too.
Yes.
Mim, did you say?
Mim. And then also my grandma Evelyn, who was the mom of
the 5 children.
Yeah, so the 5 kids. So he had 2 wonderful wives. And so
pretty amazing.
They came.
And so we wrap this up by just sharing what we're going to talk about in our next episode. And what are we going to talk about?
So next week, we're going to talk about topics couples should discuss. And we're going to talk about money. Just money as a big picture. Yes, money, big picture. And that's going to be with Chelsea, our fully funded life coordinator. So I'm excited about that. You want to wrap it up and tell everybody what we would like them to do here? Yes. If you like today's episode, please help us to get this podcast to other people who would benefit from it. You can do this by quickly rating our podcast and leaving a review. These ratings and reviews help us to make our podcast better for our listeners. If you have implemented one of our tips, share your success story with us by emailing us at info@iwbnin.com. Awesome. As we wrap it up, I know we went a little longer today. Thanks for sticking with the story. I think you would agree with me. The story was worth it. I'm inspired. Hey, leave inspired and go do one thing. Be intentionally generous today. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Monday Money Tip Podcast, presented by I Was Broke, Now I'm Not. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And for more great content and to stay up to date, visit iwbnin.com. We'll catch you next time.